The role of storytelling is to keep inventing different ways to tell the stories so that audiences can in fact understand the world around them.
I was never at any point after actuality. Actuality has nothing to do with film. Film is a myth-making machine.
And I thought I'd written a very sympathetic character.
He obviously didn't see it that way, and that's why we're sitting here today, and the film is still buried somewhere.
This is a film about a film that no one is allowed to see. On September 12, 1977, after months of delay and with much anticipation, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation aired The Tar Sands for the first and what would be the only time. The 58-minute docudrama portrayed the personal and political struggles of Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed in his negotiations to finance Syncrude and develop Alberta's tar sands. At 165 billion barrels, Alberta's Athabasca tar sands are the fourth largest proven resource of crude oil in the world. And it was the 1970s megaproject Syncrude which truly kick-started the large-scale industrialization of the Athabasca tar sands. This is the story of how a banned TV show about the Syncrude deal and political reaction to the show converged in a perfect storm of media, politics, and oil.
Today, Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed said he will take legal action against the CBC for its television drama Tar Sands, broadcast last night.
To understand the tar sands, we must first meet Peter Lougheed, a revered Albertan premier and key political architect of Syncrude. Peter Lougheed was a Calgary-born, Harvard-educated lawyer who became leader of the fledgling Progressive Conservative Party in 1965. 2 years later, in 1967, he was elected to the Alberta legislature. Lougheed spent the next 4 years refining his organizational and media skills. For Lougheed, the 1971 provincial election was a TV election. 85% of his budget was dedicated to TV, where he presented himself as a youthful, urban, and forward-looking alternative to the incumbent Social Credit Party. Lougheed's gamble worked, winning a majority government and signaling a shift in Alberta's social, political, and economic landscape. His victory also marked the start of his 14-year dynasty as premier. Media mastery and message control were hallmarks of Lougheed's election successes and key to his governing strategy.
I think the Premier is very clever in that he understands how the press operates, which most people and most politicians certainly don't.
Lougheed's telegenic politics were rooted on a belief that it was the government's duty to extract as much revenue as possible for the province's resources on behalf of Albertans. Lougheed valued government accountability, but also saw a prominent role for private business. One particular resource attracted business interest from around the world: the Athabasca tar sands.
We've all heard about the tar sands. Here they are. This great reservoir of oil which someday, somehow, would be tapped. But I wonder if we really ever understood what the tar sands really are.
The tar sands, located in northeastern Alberta, are a vast deposit of sand, clay, and heavy oil known as bitumen. The 1973 oil crisis caused price spikes, long lines at the pump, and made Alberta's tar sands a desirable political and economic play. In September 1973, Peter Lougheed signed a letter of intent with Syncrude Canada, a consortium of foreign-owned oil companies, to build a plant capable of producing 125,000 barrels of synthetic crude a day at the cost of almost $1 billion.
But I am pleased to inform the people of Alberta tonight that 3 days ago, an agreement was signed between Syncrude Canada Limited and the Government of Alberta.
U.S. capital comes into Canada to develop another of our resources. They seem to exhibit a sense of environmental responsibility. But what about financial responsibility? What's in it for us?
Syncrude's construction was plagued by political and financial obstacles and needed both provincial and federal help to save it. In the end, the project's final cost more than doubled, coming in at $2.2 billion. In 1976, as Syncrude costs continued to balloon, University of Alberta political scientist Larry Pratt published the book The Tar Sands, which argued that the Syncrude agreement was an energy sellout to the benefit of foreign-owned oil companies.
Clearly, there's enough oil and natural gas, tar sands, coal to last Alberta and Canada a long time. The question is, how fast are the resources going to be developed, and for whose benefit?
Pratt's view of Syncrude was in the minority. He also believed that Alberta's political atmosphere was one where criticism of the Lougheed government was seen as treasonous. In 1977, Peter Lougheed's popularity and the price of oil were at record highs. Alberta was being referred to as Camelot West and Lougheed as King Peter. So when Larry Pratt's Tar Sands was optioned into a CBC docudrama, the king became quite upset.
This is CBC.
That period, 74 to 77, 78, was a period of extraordinary energy at the CBC. They were testing the limits. They were doing very good work. It was a very, very exciting, if turbulent, period.
I had been working on a series called For the Record at CBC. I found in the bookstore in the airport a book called The Tar Sands by a guy by the name of Larry Pratt.
It started with Peter Pearson calling me in Vancouver. I was working on something else. And he said, I've just got this great book and we should make a film out of it.
And when I came back to CBC, I said to Ralph Thomas, who was producer on For the Record, and John Hirsch and Peter Herrndorf, I said, guys, this is a breakthrough opportunity. Now, Pratt's book, going back to the tar sands, had two enormous leaks from within the Alberta government. Civil servants who were basically saying, this is bullshit. This is going to pollute the land. This is going to poison the waters. And so we had a real basis for authenticating the story. We weren't just making it up.
I think it was a legitimate exercise by the CBC to do a new format called a docudrama, and this is a good one. Let's do it. I don't think it was motivated by anything other than good intentions.
When the word got out that one of the episodes of For the Record was the tar sands, Ken Welsh was going to play Premier Lougheed. It was about the complex interplay between the oil companies and a premier of a province. That, of course, attracted a lot of attention. What attracted the most attention is that this was a living premier, a premier who was in the job that the film had depicted. So all of those things attracted a lot of attention, and I think excitement and nervousness all rolled into one.
It took a long time to do it, and I did, I think, 8 or 9 drafts. I was quite confident in the script. I did not anticipate we would have a lot of problems, and also we structured the story in a way that Lougheed was the hero of the piece and the oil companies were the villains.
We weren't out to defame anybody or slander anyone. I mean, least of all Lougheed, whom I said I always saw as a kind of typical politician caught in a tragic situation.
The Alberta government and the Alberta people are prepared to cooperate with its resources, but only if Alberta is treated fairly and our jurisdiction over resources is respected. That's not a threat, it's a statement of Alberta public policy.
I suspect that when the lawyers at the CBC and the leadership of the CBC in Ottawa got wind of the fact that the CBC was about to do a documentary drama about a sitting, living premier who was very popular in the West, I suspect that they kind of gulped and probably quickly came to the conclusion they better make sure they had all their bases covered.
We kept track of where everything was, virtually, I mean, not every line, but most everything. What was the source of that? Then we undertook the footnote, the drama. That was basically for CBC management and the lawyers. The lawyers were always on side, you know, from the very first.
Settle in, friends. Action.
I think the industry's feeling in those days would have been that don't expect anything very good to come out of the CBC. It was only a question of how bad would it be. When it was announced that it was going to be a docudrama, this strange beast that kind of is neither non-fiction documentary nor pure work of fiction, I got very nervous.
My job was to make absolutely sure that the creative team at the CBC got every possible opportunity to do their work and be protected, and I wasn't going to give in on that point.
I thought Peter did a fabulous job shooting it and cutting of it, you know, and I feel honored to have been able to, you know, not only produce it, but also to have a big hand in the writing of it.
I was very impressed with it. I thought that Ralph and Peter did a very, very good job on it. It was a kind of tour de force by Ken Welsh. I mean, he was Lougheed. And the interesting thing is, as somebody who knew Lougheed really well, I thought, my God, he comes across well in this show. I mean, he is humane and compassionate. He is contemporary. Here's a man who's being buffeted by a whole series of forces, some local, some international, and he's dealing with it in a way that's very compelling.
It got to air 16 months after it was finished. It was finished in 76 and get to air until fall of 77.
Still got to air because the tradition at the CBC was pluralism. You could horse trade a little about this change or that change, but essentially CBC presidents, there are very few examples over 40 years where a CBC president intervened and said, this won't go.
CBC basically decided, I think, it's better to show the film than have it suppressed and have everybody pressuring to see it.
And he didn't, and the program went on the air on the 12th of September, and he may have regretted it.
In the listing of the Toronto Star, the tar sands was listed as Tarzan. It just shows how Jim Crackery the whole thing was.
A CBC drama on the decision to develop the Alberta tar sands became a major news story today. The tar sands was broadcast on the CBC national network last night after months of review by top corporation executives. Described as
certainly the reaction was instant. It was visceral. In the East, press, the media, critics all thought this was an extraordinary piece of work. They applauded the courageousness, the audacity, the ability to mix drama and documentary. And in the West, they hated it. And if you ever wanted an East-West dichotomy, it all played out in the first 48 hours.
Nevertheless, last night's show is being taken very seriously indeed by the Premier and by those around him. Neil Crawford, quote, "It stunk." Bert Hohol, quote, "Junk and drivel." Bob Dowling, quote, "I turned it off." Dave Russell, quote, "A load of crap."
It was a goddamned outrage. It's insulting, really, on many levels. You know, the whole thing was upsetting, mildly upsetting.
The entire impression created by the program surrounding the negotiations between the government and the participants in Syncrude bore no relationship in either the substance or the atmosphere to what in fact really transpired. I know because I was a participant.
Peter saw it as this was a program that got it wrong fundamentally, that it made him look like he had somehow given in to the oil interest when he was doing nothing of the kind. He was really furious. Somehow this was humiliating for him and he couldn't let it stand, so he didn't.
Lougheed says he has no choice but to bring the defamation suit against the CBC, the amount of which his lawyers haven't yet decided. Lougheed says he's not bluffing, that he wants the CBC made accountable.
I want to see them come out here to our courthouse from Toronto and answer to the questions as to how that program was produced.
It was clear-cut. Was it defamation or not? It was clear Lougheed felt he was defamed. He would have sat down with his legal counsel. They would have given him the advice whether to proceed or not. It would have had nothing to do, in my view, with whether it was a journalistic risk or not.
I was a little surprised that he took the advice of someone to launch a lawsuit against the CBC, because very few people ever sued the CBC in my era, and even fewer ever succeeded. So I really couldn't see the point of it. But of course, he was a politician. He had his voter base to think of, and I'm sure that some people in his voter base wanted him to strike back.
I was very surprised when we got sued. The basic thrust of the story was how American multinational corporations come in and bully smaller Canadian political figures. That was the thrust. It really didn't have anything to do with the tar sands.
I'm walking back to my office from lunch one day, and I get to my office door, and there's a guy wheeling out one of my filing cabinets. And I said, "What's going on?" He says, "Is this your tar sands filing cabinet?" I said, "Yeah, it says so right there." I'm from the bailiff's department," and he ran away with it. All my stuff was in there, everything, drafts, God knows what else. Never saw it again.
We went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You know, you began to get a sense from the lawyers in both sides that, given the fact that there were a couple of problems with the with the show in terms of just factual questions, there began to be the sense that if this went to court, the CBC might lose.
Their defense pretty much was, let's delay this thing as long as possible. That's not an unknown defense technique. You know, if you delay it, delay it, delay it, delay it, people's memory gets lessened, and the sting of what the action's all about heals over a little bit, and so delay is a good defense, and they were good at delay.
I found it very, very stressful. No question, I'd go home every day with a migraine, but I mean, it was tough.
I asked our people to intensify the conversation about a potential settlement. All of that was done with Ralph and Peter to make sure that they were comfortable step by step. And finally, as we got closer and closer to a date for a trial, the two sides came closer and closer and closer and closer together until finally there was a settlement.
Over 4.5 years after the tar sands was first broadcast, and after months of back and forth, the CBC and Peter Lougheed settled the defamation lawsuit on May 10th, 1982. The CBC agreed to pay Lougheed $50,000 in damages, $32,500 in costs, air a nationwide apology on primetime TV, and to never show the docudrama again.
How many layers of apology have I ever written? I think probably that's it.
This is an apology made pursuant to a settlement agreement reached with Premier Peter Lougheed on a defamation action against the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation.
We were never after this for money. It was a question of restoring any damage that might have been done. The telecast we complained of was shown at 9 o'clock, was it? I think prime time, maybe 8 o'clock, I'm not sure. So we wanted the apology to have the appropriate profile. I think it brought closure.
The CBC unreservedly apologizes to Peter Lougheed for any personal distress the corporation may have caused him as a result of the telecast of this play, and particularly as a result of the fictional characterization, dialogue, and motivations attributed to the Premier.
When you're writing a story, a script has nothing to do with reality. A script has its own reality. At the moment that you put up a camera and film Peter Pearson, all sorts of decisions have gone into where that camera goes, how the lighting works, what the background is, does Peter Pearson wear his glasses or not glasses. So I was never at any point after actuality. I mean, as far as I was concerned, and it's something I firmly believe now, actuality has nothing to do with film. Film is a myth-making machine.
I think you can't have it both ways. If you want to tell a story using drama and it's fiction, you need to step back farther from reality and play it as fiction. Invent characters that are not semi representations of any real living people. Create a narrative that lets you let those characters interact and lets them do their things, but don't pretend that it has some degree of reality.
The role of storytelling is to keep inventing different ways to tell the stories so that audiences can in fact understand the world around them. And that, I think, is part of what Peter and Ralph were trying to do, and that's why audiences found it so compelling. It's also, in many ways, why Peter Lougheed found it so disturbing.
I thought Peter and I had written a sympathetic character. I was the guy who took charge in the writing of the sympathetic character, and I thought I had written a very sympathetic character. And I think he is a sympathetic character. He obviously didn't see it that way, and that's why we're sitting here today, and the film is still buried somewhere.
In the wake of the lawsuit, the tar sands was removed from CBC's internal archive and remains unavailable to this day.